Less than a week to go before British Columbians decide on our next government. You probably know that by now that this race is coming down to the wire, with both the governing BC Liberals and the BC NDP with a shot at winning a majority, and the Green Party expected to win multiple seats for the first time ever, which could give them the balance of power in any minority situation that may arise. And today, rather than talk about shady NDP candidates and their activist past, I want to get down to brass tacks on the economy. Let's start with how BC is doing. And the answer is pretty simple. Great. We are doing great. We lead Canada in economic growth. For the past 3 years, BC has had a GDP growth rate of over 3%, leading the nation. This was confirmed again this week by the Bank of Montreal, who put out this report on the provinces. Let's just compare that to Alberta, where the last 2 years under Rachel Notley's NDP, they saw their GDP shrink by over 3% each year, including by 3.8% in 2016. Yes, the Fort Mac wildfire impacted this number last year, and yes, the drop in oil prices in 2015 has affected them too. But keep in mind that there are other oil-producing jurisdictions in North America, like Texas and North Dakota, that have not seen the same drop in GDP growth simply because of low oil prices. In this case, much of the blame can be put squarely at the feet of the Notley NDP government, their carbon tax, their personal and corporate tax increases, their royalty review, the list goes on. But let's look at some other ratings for BC in the report. BC is in the, quote, good books, according to BMO, thanks to our AAA credit rating and a balanced budget for the 5th straight year, which is allowing BC to reduce the tax burden modestly. And despite some pre-election capital spending promises, BMO says BC's, quote, debt burden remains low and stable, and the economic backdrop is a strong support, unquote. Then running through their provincial report card on our deficit plan, BC gets an A-. On our net debt, we also get an A-. On taxes, an A. And on the economy, an A, an overall grade of an A as well. No other province even scored higher than a B overall, so it looks like we're doing pretty good here in BC. But maybe you're not convinced because of the housing affordability crisis that is affecting Greater Vancouver. And believe me, I'm not going to dismiss this. I know it's a problem. And it's one that even has some conservatives and CPC supporters considering voting BC NDP this time in hopes of a change. Well, let me just read you one more thing from this BMO report about housing prices. Quote, in Vancouver, home prices, especially at the high end, have corrected modestly. The 15% transfer tax applied to non-resident buyers of residential real estate in Greater Vancouver softened the market. On the supply side, housing starts have broken out of the stable range seen across the province since 2010, led by a record, back to 1990 number of multi-unit buildings, unquote. Remember, there's only so much a government can do to influence housing prices. Approving new supply is their biggest role. But what would this economy, that admittedly does not have that much growth in wages locally, especially here in the Greater Vancouver area, despite this GDP growth, how would it look under BC NDP government led by Premier John Horgan? God, I hope that's the only time I have to utter the words Premier John Horgan. Well, anyway, if you believe the economists over at the Business Council of British Columbia, we could be headed for 55% marginal tax rates. The NDP can't seem to make up their minds on how they would follow through on their promise to eliminate medical services premiums, but most economists agree it will have to be done by rolling them into income taxes. This is where we could see that 55% rate, according to the report from the Business Council. But I actually suspect that we might see further increases to income taxes in BC, because yesterday while speaking to the Vancouver Sun editorial board, John Horgan was adamant he would not be raising taxes on the lower and middle classes. But when he was asked what he thought the middle class was defined income-wise, he said around $60,000 or $70,000. So if you make more than $60,000 a year, I think it's safe to say, after those comments, John Horgan and the NDP are coming for your pocketbook. But can we really be surprised? Let's look back at that record of the NDP in the 90s, and personal income tax rates were so out of control back then, it actually allowed the BC Liberals and Gordon Campbell to cut everyone's tax rates by 25% across the board the first day he got into office in 2001. The NDP of the 1970s also brought in a capital corporate tax, which is actually the most punitive tax any government can ever put onto businesses, and it wasn't eliminated until the BC Liberals took power. And don't forget back when NDP Premier Glenn Clark once mused taxing the equity people had in their homes. Now that is downright crazy. But so are NDP policies. So let's not make a big orange mistake next week, BC. For the Rebel.media, I'm Christopher Wilson. Keep it locked to the Rebel Canada YouTube channel for all your updates for the BC election, including election night, May 9th.